next guest, Jake Morabito is Director of the Communications and Technology Task Force at the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Thank you. My question that I have is, for the simple-minded like me, explain exactly what is net neutrality and why is reclassifying the internet as a type 2 common carrier a bad thing?
Sure. So I want you to go back in time 5 years ago. You may remember there was a lot of hubbub in the news media about the Trump administration was repealing the Obama-era net neutrality rules that you just mentioned. So actually now that what the Biden administration is doing is try to reinstall those onerous 2015 Obama-era regulations that would essentially give the federal government extended control over the way that the internet and the service providers operate. And why that's bad for consumers is it would actually impede private sector innovation that makes our networks better. And it would actually have negative consequences for consumers and make service more expensive.
Jake, Tim Jones here. Net neutrality is something that we heard of. I think, Jake, remind me if I'm wrong, a lot back in the Obama administration. Why is it rearing its ugly head again now? Is Joe Biden resurrecting the beast here in the spirit of Halloween?
Right, exactly. It's spooky season, so President Biden decided to resurrect net neutrality. And to answer your question, I really don't understand why. You've seen since net neutrality was repealed, you may remember there were several dire warnings about the internet may end as we know it, or the internet may process at 1 word per second and it would be very slow and there'd be tiers of different service. But what we've actually seen, if you look at the data and not look at anecdotal predictions, broadband investment and consumer internet speeds are actually way up since 2018. In fact, the private sector has invested over $102 billion in American broadband networks. And even as far as speeds go, both wireless 5G and fixed broadband, the wireline service has it's proliferated across the United States because the free market has been able to work its will. But enacting these onerous regulations would actually set us back and hinder our goal of expanding broadband access.
Jake, some argue that without net neutrality, internet service providers could potentially control access to content. What's your response to those concerns?
Sure. So that is a typical argument that the other side would like to point out why net neutrality is needed. And I would just point out that we've had five years now of net neutrality being repealed off the books, and those apocalyptic predictions, they haven't borne out. And in fact, I would argue that the ISPs, the internet service providers, they don't have an incentive to make service worse on their networks. So they want to make their networks as fast as possible to help consumers do everything that the internet does. As we all saw during COVID-19, the internet is a highly important service that changes the way that we work and educate our children, communicate with loved ones, and for entertainment as well. So the private sector data just shows that when you keep big government out of our internet service and we make it truly free, consumers benefit at the end of the day.
Speaking to Jake Morabito of the American Legislative Exchange Council, you can find everything regarding Jake's work at alec.org. Jake, so you've just explained to us that without this, quote, net neutrality, Jake, the left always seems to come up with these clever words that do the opposite of what they say they're going to do. So without net neutrality, Jake, you just told us the internet's been doing great. It's been doing fantastic. It's been doing better than ever. Jake, tell our audience, all of whom I'm sure use the internet in their homes, in their businesses, for their schoolwork, with their kids every single day, what might happen? What is the speculation that could happen if net neutrality is actually imposed on the American people by the Biden administration?
That's a great question. And what would happen is there's this highly noble mission of expanding internet access across the entire country, especially to remote areas that may not still have access. So Congress in recent years has appropriated billions of dollars. I think the state of Missouri specifically is slated to get about $1.7 billion in funding to expand broadband to areas that don't currently have it. Now, the problem is that if you deploy this money and you put all these onerous restrictions and make it difficult for the ISPs to do business, It's going to make it more expensive. Some areas are not going to get served, and when the service gets there, it's not going to be doing everything it needs to do, and consumer prices could even go up as a result of that. Or there will still be unserved areas even after taxpayer dollars have been spent on these projects. So in that respect, I encourage people to look at the numbers, not listen to the other side's talking points about internet openness or internet fairness, and just see what 5 years worth of repealing net neutrality has done for the American consumer.
Jake, some argue with the absence of net neutrality, there are concerns about potential censorship and bias from internet service providers. How can we prevent ISPs from abusing their power in this regard?
Well, I would just go back to showing that there's been speculation that this could theoretically be an issue, but if you look at the facts in front of us, internet service providers have not historically done mass censorship of information or done the type of tiered system organization of fast and slow lanes or blocking of content or throttling of content. Even though theoretically that would be permitted, just it hasn't come to pass. And I would even encourage people to look instead about maybe how the government, the federal government specifically, has been involved in censorship with vis-a-vis social media platforms like Twitter, and agencies like the FBI and CIA or others, dictating to social media companies what content is or is not allowed online. That's a more serious threat on the censorship front.
Jake, I'm trying to think of things that the government has gotten involved with over the last 10, 20, 30 plus years that it has had a success story on, and I'm having trouble. Nothing is coming to mind. In fact, Jake, it seems that when the government gets involved with something as large as the internet or healthcare, or look at the great job they do on Veterans Affairs, they seem to make things more expensive or they seem to break them. Jake, I guess my question is, though, how is this happening, right? We all know, we've been talking about for the last 3-4 days, that the U.S. House is not doing anything because they don't have a speaker. The Senate under Chuck Schumer has done little of nothing this year. So Congress is not doing this. Jake, is this another example where the administrative state is kind of running amok and trying to impose net neutrality without an act of Congress?
That's an excellent point, Tim. So like you mentioned, Congress has not acted on this issue. In fact, President Biden's Federal Communications Commission, they're trying to shoehorn a law from 1934 that was meant to regulate telephone companies as to how they're justifying regulating the internet in this extreme way. And that's because Congress has not acted. And I would argue this is a major question that should be determined by people's elected representatives in Congress as far as dictating how the internet should be regulated. It shouldn't be from an unelected bureaucratic agency in a partisan manner, where the FCC is essentially ramming this through on a partisan manner, and the Republican commissioners in the minority are vocalizing exactly the points I'm making today about how it would harm consumers. But the majority under the Biden administration is determined to get this through, despite all the facts in front of them that show how harmful it is.
Jake, besides net neutrality, what else are you working on as director of the Communications and Technology Task Force for ALEC?
Absolutely. So another key priority that's hitting state legislatures this cycle, it may have already come to Missouri, if not, it likely will next year, is the issue of artificial intelligence. People have heard a lot in the past year about ChatGPT or services like Google Bard. And now that some of that initial kind of the excitement and hype may have been starting to wear off, some federal and state legislators are now looking at how, if at all, should artificial intelligence be regulated. And here at ALEC, we propose that, especially for a novel technology like AI that we don't fully understand and is still developing, we need to let the free market, let innovators and businesses create products that will serve consumers and allow experimentation in a responsible way that kind of allows that innovation to flourish.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Jake Morabito, Director of the Communications and Technology Task Force at the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC can be reached, of course, at alec.org. Jake, thank you so much, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.